Hello again, my friends. Last week, on the 9th of April, we celebrated 100 years since our founder, Mary Potter, died. We've just had a wonderful celebration of her life and of her death. She died peacefully about 7 o'clock in the evening on the 9th of April 1913. And her story is just wonderful and amazing in every way, really. She died quietly, peacefully. We're told she gave a little cry and went to the God whom she loved more than words could describe, more than my words could describe anyway. It was the culmination of 65 years of intense struggle. Very quickly, I'll just do a quick overview of her life. Born in London on the 22nd of November in 1847, youngest of 5 children, 4 older brothers, born with a serious heart murmur, a congenital heart of serious proportions. Her parents were having marital difficulties when Mary was born, and her father, William Norwood Potter, was struggling with bad debts. He was a bit of a gambler, quite a clever man, a good scientist, but not good with money. And lots of other things were happening in the family too. So to come to the point, when Mary was only a year old, he left the family home, and Mrs. Potter was left to bring up 5 young children, a terrible thing in those days. Mary's frailty with her bad heart was very serious indeed. If we fast forward to when she was a teenager, she became engaged to a young man named Godfrey King, who was a very serious young man and gave her lots of spiritual books to read because he was worried about her lively personality. Isn't that great? He did himself a big disfavour because Mary was impressed by what she read and began to take her faith seriously. She broke off her engagement to Godfrey, decided to give her life to God rather than with Godfrey, and entered the Sisters of Mercy, but her heart condition forbade her from processing with that, and she was advised to leave. And there followed several years of intense suffering of every kind. When she left the Sisters of Mercy convent, she was so ill that she was virtually at death's door. And there she was, broken in health and despondent, very despondent in spirit, because she had an absolutely strong desire by this time that she was to do something for the dying of the world, as she herself had experienced. And it seemed impossible, because her mother wouldn't let her leave her home. However, of course, this is where the Holy Spirit enters into the equation, isn't it? Because God does work in strange ways. And some of Mary's writings fell into the hands of the bishop in Nottingham, Bishop Bagshaw, and eventually Mary was able to go to Nottingham, which is in itself a story that I don't have time to tell you today, but I will some other time. Went to Nottingham, and the bishop welcomed her warmly enough to get her settled into an old disused stocking factory where her holiness, her life of prayer and her own sort of integrity shone, and women began to join her. The year was 1877, and in July of that year, 2nd of July that year, the Little Company of Mary came to birth. The religious congregation of women who would pray and care for the dying, as Mary Potter had been infused by God to bring to birth. Wonderful. Just to finish the story as quickly as I can, when the congregation was only a few weeks old, Bishop Bagshaw deposed her, because in those days the male priests and bishops were always in charge. So even though it was Mary who held the vision, in every sense of that word, the bishop thought he was in charge, and he wanted the little Company of Mary to be confined to his diocese. In other words, he wanted the kudos. He wanted the praise for setting up this congregation. Mary's vision was that the sisters would be worldwide, praying and working with the dying wherever they found themselves. When she was eventually reinstated about 2 years later, having suffered terribly in the interim, she struggled to Rome, and the Pope of the day, Pope Leo XIII, welcomed her, blessed her, and eventually approved a congregation that would be worldwide and not confined to the diocese. So here's a woman who has struggled in every sense of the word. I've just given you the briefest overview of her life. So by the time and by the way, in 1913, just before she died, she learned of the fact that the sisters in Australia, because the congregation had spread worldwide, the sisters in Australia were going to come to New Zealand and start a foundation here. So we believe we've got a lovely link with her. So by the time April 1913 rolled in, Mary was very ill, 65 years old, but very unwell and unable really to be moved from her bed. And she just died peacefully, gave just a little cry, and went to God in the evening. And as we celebrated that event last week, I've been thinking more and more of how it must have been for the sisters around her bed, who must have been devastated that she'd left them, the founder, the inspirer, the inspiration, the one who held the Holy Spirit in her heart and was so close to Mary, Christ's mother. So lots of wonderful thoughts there. I'm still excited, I think is the word. There's lots of other words I could use about that experience of Mary Potter, and will hold that in my heart, I think, for a long time to come. So thank you for being with me today. Thank you for sharing the story of my loved founder, our loved founder, Mary Potter. She's been declared venerable. We're not rushing to have her declared a saint. It creates unnecessary costs that we think are not necessarily tenable at the moment, and we know she's a saint anyway. So I'll just finish with a couple of her quotes. One of my favourite ones of hers is, "Hope is a flower that grows only on earth and blooms best in adversity." It's wonderful, you think about that. Another one, it's love alone that brings us to sacrifice. There are many other things I could say, but I will leave you there. So thank you, go well and go with your God.